There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them.
Nearly all myths and cultures across the planet venerate or recount the deeds of an ancient people who coexisted with primitive man, a people of divine origin with a specific characteristic, the appearance of imposing giants. Over the years, this theme has been addressed many times. Some believe that all of this is just the fruit of myth or the misinterpretation of certain ancient texts. However, if you follow this fascinating journey carefully, you will easily realize that it's not so simple to dismiss everything outright. In fact, evidence of the existence of this mysterious people is present in various places around the planet, and there is an enormous amount of documentation and many testimonies from those who claim to have found proof of their existence. First, let's clear up a misunderstanding. We all know that gigantism is recognized by science as a pathology due to the dysfunction of certain glands, but this is not enough to justify the legends about giants. While it's possible that individuals with this rare pathology existed throughout history, and their size caused amazement and wonder, we must not forget that these are rare and isolated cases. Ancient texts speak of a race of giants, not just individual cases, and it would be unthinkable to believe that entire populations simultaneously suffered from this pathology. Moreover, many of these legends state that the height of these divine beings range between approximately 10 and 23 feet, and they are often described as very strong, immortal, or extremely long-lived. The giants we know of, on the other hand, have a much shorter height, with an average life expectancy of about 40 years. Consider that Robert Wadlow, the tallest man in the world, measured about 8 feet 11 inches and died at just 22 years old. This happens because, and keep this concept in mind because we will return to it later, the blood cannot be pumped adequately in such a large body, and this does not guarantee perfect oxygenation of the tissues. Having clarified this concept, let's look for the sources that tell us about this incredible people. In the book of Genesis of the Old Testament, there is mention of the Nephilim, which literally means those who have descended. There are various interpretations of who the Nephilim were. They are described as beings of large size, born from the union of divine beings who descended from heaven and the daughters of men. These beings were then punished by God for their behaviors. But as we said, there are many interpretations of who the Nephilim were. Moreover, they are not the only giants mentioned in the Old Testament. In the book of Numbers, for example, there is the story of the people of Anak, the Anakim.
The country we have traversed to explore is a land that devours its inhabitants. All the people we saw there are of great stature. We saw there the giants, the sons of Anak, of the giant race, in front of whom we seemed like grasshoppers, and so we must have seemed to them.
But traces of divine beings of gigantic stature are not found only in the Old Testament. Similar accounts exist in many other cultures. From the Indian Mahabharata, to the sacred scriptures of Thailand and Sri Lanka, from the Egyptian to the Irish and Basque legends, up to the American cultures that speak of divine beings of incredible height and fair complexion. So, if there are many texts that tell of an ancient people, often endowed with divine powers and of immense height, are there at the same time testimonies and findings that prove the real existence of this mysterious people? Direct evidence linked to the existence of these beings of incredible size is numerous, spanning the entire history of mankind and coming from all corners of the planet. Some of the most interesting, for example, come from the American continent. Let's see together. The Rios Codex, a manuscript written by the Spanish friar Pedro Gutierrez de los Rios, kept in the Vatican Library, and passed down to us by the Spanish conquistadors. In this text, the friar tells of the existence of a people called Xochitlicseco, composed of gigantic beings that inhabited the Mexican forests. This people, according to the friar, lived in the region of Anahuac. But the Rios Codex is not the only testimony that has come to us from the conquistadors. Herman Cortés in his diary tells of when he was shown the remains of very tall beings. He himself recounts having sent to the King of Spain a human femur, almost as tall as a person of normal stature. The legends passed down by Native Americans, on the other hand, tell of a people of giants coming from the shores of Lake Titicaca in Peru, who would have abandoned the cities and taken refuge in Patagonia. It is in Patagonia that the explorer Magellan claims to have met them, or at least some of their descendants, who were so tall that the heads of the men of the crew barely reached the waist of these giant beings. In Latin America, we cannot fail to mention the myth of Viracocha, the creator god who came from the sky and is depicted as a man of fair complexion, with thick reddish-blonde hair and incredible height. But accounts of gigantic beings also come from Africa. The populations of present-day Nubia tell of a time when their ancestors coexisted with giant beings, fair-skinned beings who spoke an incomprehensible language. Similarly, some tribes in Tanzania tell of a time when giants tilled the land and dug mines. If we look at the newspapers of the 19th and 20th centuries, especially in America, we find a multitude of articles describing discoveries of giant bones that would have belonged to a mysterious humanoid-looking people. If we search for evidence of the presence of giant beings in human history, we would be overwhelmed by thousands of testimonies, reports, and legends in which it is apparently difficult to find clarity. But at this point, it is inevitable to ask whether there is concrete evidence, a skeleton, bones, or simple artifacts that attest to the existence of these mythical beings. The answer is not simple. Let's start from a premise. Many of the images you find online are fakes, some unwitting, others less so. However, we can affirm that over the years, very interesting artifacts have come to light. In 1992, the priest Carlos Vaca made an extraordinary discovery in Ecuador. At the site called Changay Minas, which translates to Cemetery of the Gods, Father Vaca unearthed numerous bone fragments attributable to men of an incredible stature of about 23 feet. The remains were kept in the museum created by the priest himself, at least until his death in 1999. Another noteworthy discovery was made by the anthropologist Georges Vacher de la Pouge at the Bronze Age burial site of Castelnau-le-Lez in France. In the winter of 1890, 3 bone fragments were unearthed: a femur, a tibia, and a humerus.
It should be noted that these bones are undeniably human, despite their enormous size. The first is the middle part of a femur, about 5 inches long, almost cylindrical in shape, and the circumference of the bone is approximately 6 inches. The second piece is the middle upper part of a tibia. The circumference is about 5 inches at the level of the nutrient foramen. The length of the fragment is approximately 11 inches. The third, quite singular, was considered by competent anatomists to be the lower part of a humerus. The volumes of the bones were more than double those of the corresponding normal pieces. Judging on the basis of the normal intervals between anatomical points, almost double lengths are expected. The individual could plausibly have had a height of about 11.5 feet.
After the discovery, the bone fragments of the giant of Castelnau were studied by the University of Montpellier and examined by Sabatier and Delage, professors of zoology and paleontology, respectively, at the French University. They concluded that the fragments represented a race of humanoids of enormous size.
In Egypt, there were giants, much larger and differently shaped compared to normal people. Terrifying to behold. Those who have not seen with my eyes cannot believe they were so immense.
These extraordinary words belong to the historian Josephus Flavius and date back to 79 AD. It is from the mysterious Egypt that one of the most intriguing testimonies comes, that of Gregor Spury, a wealthy Swiss entrepreneur who over time developed a great passion for ancient Egypt. In 1988, during one of his trips to the land of the pharaohs, Spury would have stumbled almost by chance upon an incredible discovery. While he was in Bir Hooker, about 100 kilometers north of Cairo, he was reportedly approached by a local man who claimed to be a tomb raider for several generations. In exchange for $300, the man would show Ustory the treasure kept by his family, a highly prized object that he carefully preserved wrapped in a cloth roll. The precious object would turn out to be a mummified finger of enormous size.
It was an oblong package covered in mold. When I saw that time-darkened relic, I was astonished. I was allowed to touch it and take some photos. I placed a banknote next to it just to give an idea of its size. The finger was bent, cut at the first phalanx, and moldy. It was remarkably light, perhaps weighing about 7 ounces. My heart was racing. It was absolutely incredible, making the proper proportions. The creature that once possessed that index finger must have been around 16 feet tall.
The tomb raider, to prove the authenticity of the find, also showed Ustory a report from a forensic pathologist dating back to the 1960s, and an X-ray signed by the reporting doctor. Despite the entrepreneur's offer to purchase the artifact, the man firmly refused.
That man swore in the name of his God, and he refused to sell me the finger. He said that it was too important for him and his family.
Unfortunately, we do not have further evidence to attest to the veracity of what Ustory photographed. Supporting the claims of the anonymous tomb raider are mysterious granite sarcophagi that have been found in the Serapeum of Saqqara. These enormous artifacts weigh over 88 tons and are about 13 feet long. Could these be the tombs of these mysterious giants? But now, let's leave Egypt to its mysteries and return to Latin America. As we mentioned earlier, there are many testimonies from the Spanish conquistadors. Indeed, thanks to these, in 1928, Brian Forster discovered the famous elongated skulls. These skulls, in addition to their inexplicable dolichocephaly, also have larger than normal dimensions. Various sources have analyzed these remains, and some believe that they possess a DNA different from humans, suggesting they could be evidence of an unknown race or species that lived in those areas for hundreds of years. Some researchers even suggest that they might be the creators of the mysterious Nazca lines. As we have seen, there are multiple testimonies of the existence of men of gigantic stature scattered around the world. And these are just a small part of what can be found in historical records and researchers' chronicles. But now, let's try a mental exercise. Suppose that an ancient race of giants existed with a very ancient origin. Beings who lived, not thousands, but millions of years ago. Well, now let's try to understand if all this was possible, and if there are concrete findings to support it. Let's go back millions of years to the Mesozoic era. As far as we know, at that time, the Earth was inhabited by huge creatures, the dinosaurs, which reached their peak on the planet between 145 and 66 million years ago. Now let's ask ourselves, is it possible that humanoid-looking beings could have been present in such a remote era? And if so, what would they have looked like? According to some theories, during the Mesozoic era, the climate was generally warmer and the oxygen level higher than today. These conditions could support large bodies, allowing dinosaurs to grow to larger sizes than modern terrestrial animals. An atmosphere with more oxygen would have allowed more efficient tissue oxygenation, and consequently, some limits due to gigantism could have been overcome. Therefore, according to this theory, the large size of the animals living in that period was partly favored by the environmental conditions present on the planet at that time. At this point, we must ask ourselves, if there had been a species of humanoids, would they have been larger in size? It is possible, although this contradicts everything we know about evolutionary processes. Official science indeed states that during the era of the dinosaurs, the mammalian dinosaur evolutionary line had already separated. There were small mammals, but there could not have been life forms related to primates, as these would have evolved only millions of years later. But now, let's take a leap in time to 1966, specifically in Peru, near a place called Ica. In those days, a doctor, Javier Cabrera, received a very peculiar stone as a gift from a farmer. According to the doctor, the stone had an engraving of a fish belonging to a species extinct for an immemorial time. This discovery piqued the doctor's curiosity, leading him to continue his research and find many more stones with engravings of dinosaurs and plant species extinct for millions of years. But not only that, there were also engravings depicting incredible scenes: men riding on the backs of dinosaurs, advanced surgical operations, maps of the Earth showing the lost continents of Atlantis and Lemuria, and many other extraordinary scenes. Understandably, this discovery made headlines around the world and brought great attention to these mysterious stones. Dr. Cabrera had the stones analyzed, and the results suggested that they had been engraved at least 12,000 years ago. At this point, opinion on this discovery is divided into two main factions: those who believe the stones to be a hoax and those who are convinced of their authenticity. Now, the existence of fakes is beyond doubt. Even Dr. Cabrera himself admitted that some stones in his collection were not authentic. However, this does not invalidate the authenticity of all the artifacts. The fakes were made by local populations at a later time. Only after the world's attention focused on these stones, which quickly saw their value skyrocket. Thus, dismissing all the stones as the work of forgers is not correct. The artifacts have been analyzed by various independent research bodies that have attested to their authenticity. But there remains a problem to be solved, even if the engravings on the stones were made 12,000 years ago. How did these people know about species extinct for millions of years? How did they know about complex medical procedures? Who imparted this knowledge to them? Did the populations that lived thousands of years in those territories come into contact with beings from a distant past? Are these mysterious beings the same ones mentioned in ancient texts from around the world? For today, we will stop here. We have covered many topics that certainly deserve further exploration. Let us know your opinions in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support us and not miss new videos. Until the next story.